Let's just start with tell me a little bit about your childhood and what things were like growing up. I know it was so much different than it is now. I want to get an idea of what that was like. And
Fair bit. Um, I was born on the 1st of March 1924, and my parents lived in an apartment on Park Avenue in Minneapolis. And so that's where I guess I was growing up out of my infancy. In the meantime, they had a house built in South Minneapolis with a fairly open area. There, in other words, there were a lot of empty lots around.
oh,
And
okay.
they went to a Danish church. So I was given a uh, upbringing probably more related to Denmark than the United States. Um,
Oh,
and I
Were
was an only child.
were they first generation immigrants from
They
Denmark?
were,
Yes.
they were both born in Denmark on the same island and not very far from one another. And they met in Minneapolis. And actually, there were two Danish churches in Minneapolis. One was a Grundtvigian, which were the Happy Days.
Okay. Right,
One,
so
they were born in, or they were living in Minneapolis in separate Danish churches. One was, like I said, the Grundtvigian, which um, encompassed the Happy Danes, and the other one was the, what we call the Dour Danes, and that one was my father's. Um, but the church for the Happy Danes burned to the ground, and so the Dour Danes invited the Happy Danes to come over and use their facilities, which they did. And that's the way my parents met.
so
And
what was the difference between the two? What?
oh, a lot. One was fundamentalist, and the other one was very liberal. Uh,
Okay.
they played cards. They um, went on dates, and they were the Happy Danes.
did they do the services in Danish?
They did for a while. Both of them did. I believe the Happy Danes did it for a longer period of time than the Dour Danes, because a lot of the Happy Dane uh, uh, base was Danish. So they had Danish flags and etc. And I knew a lot of kids from the Happy Danes also, and there was no problem going out with one another. Um, so anyway, uh, we had this huge house. It was a 9-room house, and it was custom built. Um, so it was kind of interesting that right at the start of the Depression, they were saddled with a really an expensive house. But my mother was um, very gifted in handling the finances, so she always had a way around paying the bills and keeping the mortgage up. Fortunately, we didn't lose the house. Uh,
What did your dad do for a living?
he was a knitter. He worked with a knitting machine, and he was a mechanic. He uh, learned his trade in Germany, so he was able to uh, either even manufacture pieces that would go into the machine and keep it running. He had two um, places that he worked at. One was, I can't remember which had what machine, but uh, one of them was a place that produced dresses and suits and so forth off the knitting machine. And the other was a place that produced the cuffs and the bottoms of jackets,
Did he
etc.
did he
Those
work
were,
in both places at the same time?
pardon?
Did he work
Yeah,
in both places at the same time?
yeah, he would go on weekends over to the other place. His main place was the one that did the arm, the wristbands and the bottom bands of jackets and so forth. Anyway, he managed to do a pretty good job, and uh, even though his salary was low, my mother uh, always made it. In fact, she every once in a while would do embroidery by the piece, and so she made a little money too. And then they also rented out the house or the apartment, and one period they did rent out the whole house while we moved into an apartment. I think they got $75 a month for the house, and they paid uh, $18 or $19 a month for their apartment.
So what would that
So
$75 translate to today?
probably 700.
Okay. Cool. Now, I want to go back to what we were talking a second ago. Was the area primarily Danish, the people, or was there a mixed area?
It's a mixed area. There
Okay.
were Polish and German, uh, and there were some university professors because right across the river was the University of Minnesota.
Okay.
We were right on the bank, on the bank of the Mississippi, and uh, that was a lot of fun because it was maybe 80 feet down to the water, and so was a beautiful canyon and beautiful area for kids to play in, and in spite of the fact that the river was there, we never had problems. I have one little story about that river area. There was a railroad bridge that crossed just about a block away from our house, and um, it was one of the ones that had a rectangular steel, I don't know what you want to call it, but, and the tracks ran on one side, and there was a place where the people who did maintenance and so forth on the bridge and on whatever, and that was on the bottom part of that rectangle. And it was a couple of boards that went across the river. And it was a good 60 feet above the water's edge. And when it rained in the wintertime, it got very slippery with ice. And so very often Halloween would fall on a period when things would freeze. So at one point, some wag decided to hang a dummy off this wooden thing and called up the cops and told them that somebody was hanging. And this was during the Depression, of course, when people would commit suicide. So it was a reasonable story. So the cops came out and they just had an awful time getting out to where this thing, and then it turned out that it was just a dummy. So that was our claim to fame.
Did they ever did the person who did it get in trouble, or were they never happened?
They never found done it. So anyway, when I grew up, I had lots of enjoyable moments.
Was there a lot of traffic on the river at that point?
No,
No.
every once in a while, a barge would go by, and but down the river we had the bridge or the dam, what we call the Ford Dam, because it was right where Ford had an assembly plant in the Twin Cities. And so anyway, there was a lot of movement in boat traffic up and down the river. And there wasn't much of a river left after the dam. So anyway, it was a lot of fun. And the dam was built right by what we call Minnehaha Park. And there was it was an Indian story about the people who lived there. And of course, there were a lot of lakes in Minneapolis. Yeah. And it was a great place to grow up. Yeah.
What was going to school like? Or did you not have to worry about that?
No, I had to worry about that. I always had a long walk to school. There were no schools right around the corner. I had there was a portable school that I went to for a while. And then there was, I outgrew that and went to an elementary school. And then there was a middle school, and then South High School, which had a bad reputation. one time I remember somebody got after me and a bunch of kids that were kind of out of hand. So they asked me where I went to school, and I told them South. And they said, yeah, I might have known. So that was the reputation that it had.
It's,
I went to South High School, and I was on the boxing team, and got a letter. I didn't win my division, but almost. So when I got in the Marine Corps, I got involved in smokers, and I did pretty well. In fact, the DIs left me alone.
well, I guess
What is smokers?
That's boxing.